緩やかな丘を縫って駆けてくる馬車迎えに来るの迎えに来るのね誰かが私を連れて行くのね白い花の道へ風のふるさとへ連れて行くのね連れて行くのね
In the year 1870, a little red-haired orphan girl called Anne Shirley came to Green Gables, the farm of Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert. She was hoping to find a new home for herself, but the Cuthberts needed a boy to help them with all the work on the farm. Anne was very disappointed. She would have loved to stay at Green Gables, but despite begging to stay, she was to be sent back to the orphanage.
Hello, Marilla. Oh, these chickens. You'll find nothing to eat out here. Shoo, come on, off with you. Shoo. I wasn't expecting to see you today. To what do I owe the pleasure? But that's so rude of me. Won't you come in? Anne, how are you, child?
I'm very well, thank you, under the circumstances.
That's nice, Anne.
Mrs. Spencer, I have to talk to you very urgently.
I've got you, Lily. You've been caught. It's Anne. Good morning, Mrs. Cuthbert.
Good morning, Flora.
Lily is such a gorgeous little thing, isn't she? And it's amazing, actually, how quickly she settled in. She was at home here right from the first day. She is a trusting child. All of us absolutely adore the little thing. Isn't she the sweetest thing?
Mrs. Spencer, I'm afraid there's been a serious misunderstanding. Perhaps you could tell me how it came about. The thing is, when we made our application and filled in the guardianship papers, we specifically asked for a boy, not a girl at all.
But that can't be right.
What we need is a boy about 10 years old.
Oh, but that's impossible. A boy? When my brother Robert sent his daughter Nyaa.si to bring me your application, I clearly remember reading it, and it definitely stated that you wanted a girl. This is too much for me. What with the transport arrangements and everything, I must have been completely confused. Oh, Marilla, this is so embarrassing. Please, I hope you can forgive me.
We were also at fault, Mrs. Spencer. We should have come here ourselves and explained everything to you in person. After all, it's an important matter, and we should have paid much closer attention to it. So what do you suggest we do now, Mrs. Spencer? I presume, then, that you'll take her back to the orphanage.
Yes, of course, it was our mistake after all. But she needn't go back to the orphanage at all, you know. Why, only yesterday Mrs. Blewett was asking me if I had a girl for her. She's very busy. She needs someone to help her with the housework.
Mrs. Peter Blewett?
Mrs. Blewett has a big family to look after, and she just can't find anyone to help her in the house. Anne might just be the answer to her problem.
So you say Mrs. Blewett...
This way we can solve Mrs. Blewett's problem and at the same time find a home for Anne. It's what I call a happy coincidence. Why, it's just too good to be true. Here comes Mrs. Blewett now. She'll be delighted when she hears. Excuse me, I'll only be a moment. Hello, Mrs. Blewett. I have such good news for you. And here is the little girl in person. I can assure you she's very good with little children. She's exactly what you're looking for.
How old are you? And what's your given name, child? Well? I asked you a question. How old are you?
Anne is 11 years old, Mrs. Blewett.
I'd like to hear that from the child herself, if it's all the same to you.
I don't think we should be discussing something as important as this while we're standing outside. Why don't we all go inside? Please, do go ahead. Flora, be a good girl and put on the kettle.
All right, Mama, I'm coming.
Am I right, Mrs. Blewett? What do you think? Isn't this little girl exactly what you've been looking for all along?
To tell the truth, she's not much to look at, but she seems to be quite well behaved. Anyway, when they're pretty, they only end up giving you a lot of trouble. She actually strikes me as a little dull. But I'd much rather have a dull girl than one of those cheeky ones. Now listen to me. If I take you into my house, I expect you to be a well-behaved girl, understand? Hard-working, clean and respectful. In short, I expect you to work for a living in my house. Don't think for one moment the Blewetts will support you. Mrs. Spencer, I think I'll take her. I just can't cope without help anymore.
Oh, if only you knew how glad this makes me. The whole business with Anne has made me really upset, Mrs. Blewett.
Well, dear, if that's all right with you, Marilla, she can come with me now.
I don't know. I mean, I can't really say. You see, my brother and I haven't finally decided whether we want to keep the girl down on the farm with us or not.
Oh?
Well, to be quite honest with you, Matthew would prefer to keep little Anne at Green Gables. As a matter of fact, Mrs. Spencer, my only reason for driving down to see you today was to find out how all the confusion actually came about in the first place. So I think I'd better take her home and discuss the whole thing once more with Matthew. I feel we need to go into this matter at length. Should we decide not to keep her, Mrs. Blewett, we'll bring her over to you tomorrow. Otherwise, we'll let you know as soon as possible. How does that sound to you, Mrs. Blewett?
You leave me no option, but then you have first claim on the child. Anyway, I only came over to collect a recipe. Frankly, the whole business is quite a mix-up.
Just a minute, Mrs. Blewett.
Thank you, Mrs. Cuthbert. Mrs. Cuthbert, did I really hear tell Mrs. Blewett that I might be staying at Green Gables after all? Is that what you meant when you spoke to Mrs. Blewett? Oh, please tell me that I didn't dream up the whole thing. Oh. So I must have imagined it after all.
Oh, Anne, now you really shouldn't let that imagination of yours run away with you. At some stage you'll have to start separating reality from your imagination, you know. Yes, I really did tell Mrs. Spencer that we'd keep you, perhaps. But nothing has been decided yet. I shall have to discuss the whole thing with Matthew. I can't simply ignore him. One thing's for sure, you wouldn't have been much help to Mrs. Blewett anyway.
I think I'd rather go back to the orphanage 100 times than work at Mrs. Blewett's house. You know what? She looks just like a rusty old screwdriver.
What? Anne, a well-brought-up young girl like yourself should be ashamed of passing a rude remark like that about a lady she doesn't know in the slightest.
Matthew spent the whole afternoon in the garden, waiting for Marilla to come back. He was hoping against hope that she would bring Anne with her. In the few hours that he'd known her, Anne had stolen his heart. When he caught sight of the buggy, Matthew held his breath.
Now I have to unhitch the horse. You may go up to your room and have a little rest, Anne.
Oh, no, I'd really like to help. What can I do?
Nothing for the moment. You can come down when I call you for supper.
Oh, well, so far so good, I suppose. It's nice to be back here.
If you ask me, I think that Blewett woman is a witch. I wouldn't send my worst enemies to work for her.
What was that you said?
Oh, nothing really. Wasn't important.
Matthew, we must take a decision. Either we send Anne to live with Mrs. Blewett, or we keep her here with us at Green Gables.
Well,
I've been thinking about it. I can see you're growing fond of the child, Matthew, and that's why I'm prepared to consider this for your sake. Somehow I feel I have a duty to take the child in. Oh, Matthew, I've never had anything to do with raising children. I'll probably make a terrible mess of it. But as far as I'm concerned, she can stay.
I knew it, Marilla. I knew your good-hearted nature would show sooner or later. You couldn't resist her, could you? You know, Anne is such a special little thing, and so interesting, too.
I'd like it better if she were a specially helpful little thing.
Oh, yes, she'll be a great help. Don't you worry about that. Anne will learn very quickly.
That I don't doubt, because I intend to see to it personally. Bringing up a girl is a woman's work, I'm afraid. If I go wrong at times, I'll ask you to step in and give me a hand with her. Will you do that for me, Matthew?
No, Marilla, you do everything so well. I trust you absolutely with the little child. Just love her and be as good to her as you want, so long as you don't spoil her too much.
Well, Matthew, she has you wrapped round her little finger already. How long will it take her to do precisely the same with me? That's the question I've begun to ask myself. In any case, I shall only tell her what we've decided tomorrow morning. Good heavens, what have we let ourselves in for?
Why don't you tell her tonight, Marilla? The poor child must be on tenterhooks. She wants to know.
Matthew, you have chores to finish.
That day, Matthew Cuthbert felt like the luckiest man in the world. Anne still had no idea that she would be staying on at Green Gables. She'd fallen into an exhausted sleep and was having the most wonderful dream. In her dream, she was allowed to stay at Green Gables and read every book in the house. And Matthew even asked her to read to him. He was a good listener, and Anne loved to read aloud. For hours, the two of them would sit in Anne's room, unaware of anything around them. They had been transported to a world of their own, the world of fantasy.
Anne! 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 It's supper time!
Oh, I must have dropped off to sleep, I suppose.
All right, young lady. Last night I noticed you left all your clothes scattered everywhere across the floor of this room. Listen, my child, that's no way to treat clothes, you know. They won't last very long then. You should drape them over the chair.
I'm very sorry. You see, I was so upset last night that I completely forgot about folding my clothes properly. But I'll do everything the right way tonight. Just watch me. I was taught how to do it properly at the orphanage, Mrs. Cuthbert. Mind you, I have to admit, I forgot to do it quite often. I was sometimes too tired to remember.
Fine. Now you'd better say your prayers and get into bed. I'll come by in a few minutes and blow out the candle.
What prayers do you mean? I've never prayed before.
Anne, what was that you said? Has no one ever taught you to pray, my child? Don't you know about God?
I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son.
Well, Anne, at least you know something about it. Thank goodness. Where did you learn that?
I learnt it at Sunday school in the orphanage. I had to learn the whole catechism off by heart. I like the Bible because it has such beautiful words in it. I just love the 23rd Psalm. It's one of my favourites. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, yet will I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
I would prefer you just to say an ordinary prayer. I've never heard of a girl who couldn't say her prayers, just simple, ordinary bedtime prayers. What else did that orphanage forget to teach you?
Oh, they taught me that girls who don't have red hair find it much easier to love God.
Ah?
And people who don't have red hair haven't the slightest idea how awful it feels to have it. Mrs. Thomas at the orphanage told me I should be grateful and thank God for making my hair the same colour as Carrot's. She told me that he actually gave me this carroty hair on purpose. And since then I've been a little cross with God. But all the same, I could always learn to say my prayers by heart if you would really like me to.
Why don't you just kneel down and say whatever comes into your head first, my girl?
But tell me, why do I have to kneel down? Just say that you're alone in a big forest next to a river, or in a field of golden green and the sun is shining.
My child, what on earth are you trying to tell me now?
I was trying to tell you that you can pray anywhere. For instance, you know how the sky is sometimes a really beautiful shade of blue? And the blue just seems to go on and on forever in the distance? Well, when you're looking up at the blue sky like that, which goes on forever, then you can pray. Well, I can anyway, and then the words just come all by themselves. I'm ready now. What do you think I should say?
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You're old enough to know what you want to say when you pray, Anne, wouldn't you agree? Just thank God for all the mercies he's shown you in the past and ask him for things you'd like him to do in the future. It's really quite easy.
Yes, I'm sure it is quite easy. Dear God, our Heavenly Father. That's how the preacher did it when he came to the orphanage on Sundays. Who created the heavens and the earth, I thank you. For the white way of delight and the lake of shining waters. And for Bonnie on the windowsill and for Snow Queen, who is a cherry tree. Heavenly Father, I'm really very grateful for all you've done for me. And what I want would take hours to tell, so I shall mention only 2 things. Here they are, and I hope you can grant my wishes. Heavenly Father, I beg you to arrange things so that I won't have to leave Green Gables. And that I'll be pretty when I grow up, if that's all right with you. Please trust that I remain, sir, your most devoted, humble and obedient servant, the undersigned, Anne Shirley. Did I do it properly? Of course I could have put in a lot more fancy words, but I didn't have time to think about it and practice enough beforehand.
That was fine. Now into bed with you.
Yes. Good night. Do you know what? When I was praying a minute ago, I was so worried that I'd make a mistake, and now I realise that I made quite a big one. I should have said Amen, shouldn't I? Instead of obedient servant.
Well, to tell you the truth, it sounded extremely polite, Anne.
Well, blow me down. Now, that's a relief.
Do you know what, Matthew Cuthbert? She ends her prayers with your humble and obedient servant instead of Amen. She must go to Sunday school as soon as possible. And there's something else we must attend to immediately. I want our girl to have a pretty dress. Oh, I've never had anything like this to worry about before, but I think I'm actually starting to enjoy it, believe it or not. What coloured dress would you suppose would go with her hair, Matthew? We've such a lot of things to do.
So you tell me. And quite a few dresses to buy as well.
Slowly, Marilla began to realize that she'd always wanted a little girl. And then the great day dawned. The next morning, Marilla told Anne that she could stay at Green Gables. For Anne, it was a dream come true. She was so overjoyed, she didn't know what to do with herself. But we'll leave that story for the next time.
走っても終わらない花の波湖は遠く燃える雲はもっと遠く